Hi, Matt Duke here with the South Texas Business Lawyers, where we've got a great podcast for you today with Brandon Howard from Zelifcam. Now, we are here at Geekdom, and there's a lot of tech companies that get started here within these four walls, and most of them are going to be looking for a developer. And if you're one of these companies, you don't want to miss what we're going to talk about. Brandon and Zelifcam, they're out there doing highly sophisticated programming and development for companies really across the world, and they're here in our own backyard. We're going to talk about things like, how do you select a developer? What are the things you need to be prepared for? How do you protect your intellectual property? What is offshore, nearshore, all those sorts of terms that are going to matter to you as a startup specifically, or if you're into the tech world. And for those of you that aren't in the tech world, there's a lot of blending that's going on now between AI and others. Maybe it's good to know about how some of these things are created. So sit back and watch as we talk with Brandon Howard and Zelifcam about all the things you need to know when getting that qualified developer for your company. So we're here with Brandon Howard from Zelifcam, and we're going to be talking about everything developers, which is huge because in the tech industry, outside of your lawyer that's your best friend, your developer's your best friend. Is that right, Brandon?
Yep.
Hey, thanks so much for coming on, man.
Well, thank you for having me.
All right. So there is so much we could talk about when it comes to development, but let's talk about it, I guess, in a journey of someone that's just getting started and they know that they're going to need technology and they're going to need some sort of development assistance. So let's just go all the way to the beginning of, I have an idea.
Okay.
All right. What are the types of things that a startup founder needs to be thinking at, literally at the ideation level, where they have this grand idea of an app or some sort of, technology that is going to change the world? What do they need to start thinking about immediately from a developer standpoint?
So from a developer standpoint, they need to think about who are they going to contact for such a thing? If you're developing software that's never been built before, if you're innovating, if you're doing something that you can't Google answers for, then it's going to be harder to find a good developer.
Right.
A WordPress site is a dime a dozen, but creating a truly unique piece of software, unique product, that's a different world completely. And at that point, you need to find someone or find a company who has the ability to think outside the box, to piece things together. A great example is Twitter. Back in the day when they started taking off, they always had the fail well up. They didn't expect to grow so quickly, and it was always failing. They were using a framework called Ruby on Rails at the time, and they just didn't scale it very well. And then over the course of months, they slowly fixed it. Now, had they known ahead of time that, hey, we're going to scale this thing up, they may have picked a different framework. They may have architected it differently. It's hard to say. So yeah, finding the right company, finding one that has good reviews, good, just is available, great communication. That's all you really need.
Nice. So if I've got some sort of idea for some technology, when is it best to start the search for a developer? I mean, we're here at Geekdom as always, and we've got a lot of ideation that goes on here, which are just ideas, right? We're not to the level of an MVP, a minimally viable product, but just at the ideation level, are there resources out there, that maybe free resources online, that can help some sort of entrepreneur start to figure out what sort of frameworks? I mean, I didn't know Ruby on Rails. I never heard of that one before. I'm gonna learn a lot today. Are there resources out there that maybe they can look for?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's always resources, but there's things that you're just not going to figure out. If you're not a tech person, you're not going to understand the ideas of scaling. You're not going to understand security, backups, things like that. So cool thing about here at Geekdom is they do have that mentorship program.
Right.
Basically, you can schedule time with people like me and other folks around here that are pretty good at technology stuff.
Well, there you go.
And you
There's
can ask
a
those
free
questions.
one right there.
Yeah.
I mean, free for Geekdom members, so make sure you're a Geekdom member. All right, so when, let's say that we've gone and we've got the idea. Okay, and I know I need a developer. All right, what are the tips for a founder in setting up an all-star development team? Like, what would you think are the things that the tips that they need to do to get the right team together? What do they need to look for? What kind of people, do they need to? What are those tips?
You always want to have a subject matter expert. If you're building a software for real estate, a new technology platform in real estate, you should probably have a technical officer or somebody technical on the team who has a background in that world, so they understand the vernacular, so they understand business processes. So you're not having to teach them everything. And that way they can contribute to conversations. Same with any industry. So oil and gas, whatever it is, if you have a subject matter expert, it'll make your life a lot easier.
What about, so for that though, is this somebody that is a tech person that's a subject matter expert, or just a business person that's a subject matter expert?
A tech person who's a SME is always wonderful.
Wow, where do you find those?
It's hard to do.
I was going to say, how many oil and gas SMEs do they have out there?
Well, you'd be surprised. Like I've
on
got
the tech side.
So two of the folks on my team are oil and gas SMEs.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah, we have a real estate SME. We find those people. Yeah.
So, okay. So see, notice here, it's interesting because we're already talking right from the beginning, right? It's like a lawyer, right? I mean, you need a lawyer on the team. You need them to help you guide you, and you want somebody that understands the industry when they're doing that, on there. What are some of the other things to look for? One of the things we'll talk about, and we can talk about it now, is a lot of times people hear about offshoring development. Can you just define for our audience, what is offshoring? What does that mean?
Okay, so there's offshore and then there's nearshore.
Right.
Also. So offshore, you may be sending your work to India, Russia, somewhere on the other side of the world. Nearshore, you may be doing something more like in South America. Okay. So you may be in a closer time zone. So there's not a 12-hour difference or anything like that.
Nice. Is there pros and cons with offshore versus nearshore? I mean, we're going to get into a second the legal aspects of all that, but just from a process standpoint, is there any issues you have? So
pros and cons for both. So pros for nearshoring is you get a closer cultural match typically.
Okay.
So a lot of times, a lot of cultural things go missing in translation when you're dealing with offshore people.
Got it.
Time zone differences are a big issue as well. You may send a message or an email at 5 p.m. On a Thursday and not hear back till Friday morning or Friday night.
Right.
It just depends. So nearshore is sometimes a little more efficient from a cost perspective. Upfront cost, offshore is typically lower cost.
Okay.
But you pay in more administrative work, more project management, more project planning, more QA. So upfront it costs less, but it does require a little more overhead on the admin side.
So let's talk about those structures. So we've got clients that are in the tech industry, and we've done development agreements for developers, and we've done development agreements for clients that are putting those together. From a structure standpoint, it's been my observation for most of the time a developer structure includes a single point of contact, usually your administrative costs, that you're going to pay some sort of, either daily rate or hourly rate, or sometimes it's an allocation, which those are dangerous. Be careful for these allocation ones sometimes. If your project's really, really big and you have dedicated people, that makes sense. But I had one, it was like, anyway, long story short. But you have an administration person, and they're really like the point of contact, and they distribute the work. And that can be a significant part of your cost. And then they bring in subject matter experts, different types of developers. Can you talk a little bit about the teams? I'd love to know about offshore teams, and I'd really like to hear about how you structure teams in Zelifcam.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so normally with offshore teams, you'll have a project manager who kind of helps bridge that cultural gap. They may have spent a lot of time in America and kind of understand us a little better, hopefully. Otherwise, you'll spend a lot of time planning with them, and there will still be that gap of communication, unfortunately. So it is a lot of work. How we structure things, we have a dedicated project manager for every project. In America, sometimes we do use offshore developers, but all of our project managers are used to dealing with offshore and nearshore developers.
Okay, nice. And so what are the different types of people that typically, do you have different types of developers, I'm assuming, that you bring in based upon the project? And how do you staff a team at the beginning? Like, how would a founder know what's the right level of staffing for. I mean, we got the project manager, but like I've dealt with companies, that we've got Salesforce development and and the people that know the APIs, and there seems to be batches. How do I know as an entrepreneur, as a founder, what's the right staffing for my project? How do I learn those kind of aspects?
Man, trial by fire usually. No,
I was hoping there is some of that, and I've had that personal experience as well of, man, I just wasted some money there. If I'd have known this, I'd have done it differently. But yeah, what do you got?
So oftentimes it's trial by fire.
Okay.
But if you have a good project manager, they can usually give you a pretty good estimate. So if you have an end date in mind for your project and you have the budget and a good project manager, it may not take very long to get your project done if you can afford the staff, right?
Right.
But if you can only afford a single developer working for a year, they might be overloaded for a year and you may get poor quality code.
Right.
So it's a balancing act of like developer productivity, quality, and cost.
So, that's interesting just from a legal side on it. So if we're going to contract with the developer for that, right, we want to make sure that we know, all right, how am I going to pay for this, right? And, you've got some things that are basically just, I'm buying labor, and again, we just talked about that a second ago where there's an allocation potentially of like the project manager, and then it's an hourly basis for the different type of developers on your project. And it's a rate sheet with a time card, which is pretty standard in the industry a lot of times, right?
Yes.
Especially for agile projects that are harder to scope out, I would assume. Is that right?
Exactly.
So, when it comes to that, the important things is, making sure that those time cards match those, what you believe is what's been done. Again, no different than a lawyer.
Yeah.
When we send the bills, they, check and make sure that your lawyer, did they spend that quality time on my project for that? But let's talk about maybe, from a quality standpoint, how does somebody ensure that, all right, well, I know I'm paying somebody for time, but how do I know I'm getting quality deliverables for what I'm paying for in that kind of circumstance?
That's a great question. As long as you have good project planning where there is a set of acceptance criteria.
Okay.
So, hey, I want login to work this way, and I only accept it as completed correctly when these things happen, then that's a great way to control quality. Because if you just leave it open to, hey, I need a login system. Well, what does success look like? What is the goal? So you have to define acceptance criteria.
And I would say define that in writing, right?
Yes, always.
Yeah, especially with the offshores, right? Which is why I highly recommend you don't use offshores. And I'll just do my little spiel here for a second. From an intellectual property standpoint, people always say, oh, well, they had me sign an NDA and I have confidentiality that's there. Well, the reality is if somebody takes that in a foreign jurisdiction, that can be very difficult to police that is out there. Now, from an ownership standpoint and protecting on the states, if you need to have those things to make sure that you can demonstrate you're the owner, but to go ahead and enforce that, against some of these Upwork, type, like maybe solos or something, it's nearly impossible to find somebody in India to do that. So be careful, which is the benefit of dealing with US-based developers and US-based companies is the added benefit of you get quality, you know what you're getting, and you actually have a tighter relationship, which makes it for a better relationship, in my opinion, for that. But let's go to, from a phasing standpoint and kind of go back a little bit. And I'm jumping around a little bit, but a lot of times it's pay for just those hours of time that's there. I've done that myself for my startup. Hey, I need this. I will tell you, you said something that we talked about something a second ago. Delineating what success looks like in writing for each of the deliverables is critical. Because I did use offshore. You're like, okay, the guy's a hypocrite. Yeah, it's cheaper. Sorry. But I knew the risks, and you can use it too if you know the risks. But I realized in having conversations with people, project manager who was better at English, we still had communication gaps. So I learned through, just communicating with them, like it took me basically 2 rounds to get it right. So I just started typing it up and making sure we're on the same page. So that way, for a lot of times they got it right on the first try because there's no communications. But let's go to where I know I'm going to have a series of phases and I bring I'm bringing on a developer at the beginning. In my experience in dealing with clients, we usually have we call it the base phase or phase 0 that basically is a planning phase. what does that look like? How can a founder utilize really just a planning phase with a developer to help get things into a better situation?
Yeah, so we call it a discovery and planning phase over here. But yeah, we sit down with the owner, the founder, whoever at the company, our point of contact, and we define who the stakeholders are, who's allowed to make decisions, all that stuff. And then we go collect user stories. And that's, I'd really like it if this happened. I'd really like it if this happened. And then we take it to the main stakeholder and get that buy-in that all of this is correct. Now, what's cool about doing it this way is it gives us a chance to properly estimate costs, resources needed, things like that. It doesn't surprise them either because phase 0 or this discovery and planning, it's to really figure out what are you getting into and is the cost really worth it versus something maybe off the shelf. Maybe there's an off the shelf software you can customize. And yeah, we do phase 0s all the time.
So from an MVP standpoint, which again, usually is the next step after ideation and someone's validated that idea, they're just trying to get a product that is something that is tangible, that can demonstrate this is our solution or what our solution would look like.
Yeah.
A lot of third-party, software works in the interim. I mean, I've just seen that a whole lot. What are some of the things for a founder to consider if they are going to use a third-party software for that MVP, though?
Yeah, absolutely. So be aware of vendor lock-in. That's a huge thing. So
explain that. What is vendor lock-in?
So vendor lock-in is, let's take Bubble.io. It's a low-code builder, low-code software builder. And it works. It works pretty well. But you'll find that you slowly outgrow it and you basically have to learn to program. And at a certain point, you have to find someone who specializes in Bubble.io to do the work. And everything kind of slows to a halt and it becomes a real problem. Then when you're ready to get out, unless they've changed it, I haven't looked at it in months, you don't have an exit path. You
got to go recreate.
You got to rebuild your stuff.
Else.
Yeah. And one of our largest clients, same thing happened to them, and that's why they're our client now. They got stuck on a low-code platform, couldn't get their stuff off, and then we've rebuilt everything.
Well, and that's interesting because I have had some clients that did. I mean, it's a strategic decision, for that because one, I got to get it to an MVP so that way I can raise the round, a high round to get me off. But what I've found is they don't know they're locked in and they don't attribute that into their use of funds and their burn rate of actually fixing that. So there's I guess if somebody understands that and says, well, I just need to get to that point and this may be to demonstrate functionality parts, but we're gonna have to rebuild the whole thing and I'm gonna raise for it, probably works. But it catches the ones that think, oh, I'm here and now I'm going to go, here, that doesn't realize, you actually got to restart the whole thing.
Exactly.
Because you left. So I didn't even think about that.
And, we've even done prototypes for people using Figma. It's wonderful.
What is Figma?
Figma is just a UI UX design tool.
Okay.
And you can design entire applications on it. And you can make it look like you're clicking and make it look like it works. But there's no programming. It's just drag and drop. And then you can export everything and use it in a real program eventually.
Oh, wow.
So it's great for presentations. You don't have to write any code. You just need someone who's good at design.
Well, there you go. I mean, See, again, from a developer standpoint, people don't realize that. I mean, I didn't. I just thought go off and get running and start hiring offshore people, even though I'd say don't hire offshore people. So, from Zelifcam standpoint, when you're onboarding on new clients, to there, what are the things that are most helpful to you as somebody's coming on? Like what, I know from a client standpoint, I talked to a new client today, people that are very well organized, clearly articulate, even if they come to me with papers of this is what I want, at least I get it. So those are clients that I know are just well prepared. How does a founder really get themselves prepared to make sure they can interact with your team?
So ultimately it comes down to if they know what they want. If they can define success. They don't have to know the steps to get there, but if they can articulate, like what problem are they solving? How will it solve the problem? If they've got some algorithm in mind that's going to fix something, like describe it to us, explain it to us. Because if you come to us with like, I want this product and that's all Like, well, we're not a subject matter expert. Like,
Right.
you need to be an expert.
That's a shame because, Brandon, I got like a book somewhere with a bunch of ideas. I'll be like, here, world peace. You got that one?
We can do it. We can try.
Well, but that makes sense to be able to have a well-defined. And again, we've had, the Geekdom folks have been here. We talked about ideation, incubation, and those. It's critical because the worst thing you can do is, some people I hear is just get going. Well, if you just start running down the wrong path, right, you've just wasted money. Money that you can't get back. You got to go find it from somewhere else. From a technology stack, let's talk about technology stacks because we have clients that are that are tech companies, and one of the things, is it a wireframe? Is that what it is, where it shows the stacks that are and how they're integrated, or I call them process flows, but I don't know. I'm not a developer.
It depends on the company, but yeah.
What are things to think about when putting together a tech stack for some sort of solution that you're building?
So it's not a one size fits all model. Okay.
Got it.
So you'll see people that come at you and say, you need to use React for everything. You need to use Go. You need to use Flutter. And typically that's not true. A lot of things don't need these like magical front end JavaScript frameworks. Like, you really have to pick a tech stack, which is right for the job. And if anybody comes at you and says you have to use this, it's the best thing to do, you need to talk to somebody else. If they give you tech ideas or tech stack opinions before they even know your project, you need to talk to somebody else.
There you go.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you don't feel like you're getting led into what they know and away from what they don't know in those sort of circumstances. One of the things I was going to ask you is, with regard to speed. So how does Zelifcam address, we'll just talk specifically for them, development versus quality assurance to make sure that the code that's getting developed, and then double checking that back to make sure, okay, is the overall software working? Mm-hmm. How do you guys balance that?
So it really depends on the project. We have some clients that they truly just want to see things come out, and they get a lot of technical debt because of it. Then we also have clients that say, we want quality first, we want some speed, and we're willing to pay for QA time and things like that. So we'll have automated quality assurance tests, and if needed, we'll even have a QA person manually go over it as well as an end-to-end test.
Talk to us what QA looks like. Mm-hmm. I mean, code is code, right?
Yeah, code is code.
A bunch of digits and everything else. What is how do you do a quality check of code?
Okay, so it starts with the developer, really. Well, it starts with the project planner.
Okay.
So first you have your acceptance criteria,
okay,
right? And so when we're going to write a feature for an application, we start with test or unit tests. It's like it's a testing pyramid. Unit tests make the base of it, and there's thousands of them depending on the code base. And so our developers write their unit tests. They write all their different variations of them. They build the feature, and then they submit a merge request to us, and that's when our QA team takes over. Our CI pipeline takes over, which is continuous integration, and it runs all the tests. If it fails, it goes straight back to the developer and will not ever go to QA until it passes CI.
Got it.
And then after that passes, our QA team takes over, and they'll take a couple looks at it, try to test a few things that maybe we missed, maybe the developer missed, implement those things, and then pass it along.
So it's almost like, again, my simple mind over here, it's like construction. So if I'm hearing you right, they develop code. Mm-hmm. It then just makes sure it's going to fit into whatever piece of the overall software it needs to. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't, reject it out. If it does, then there's QI that just makes sure that all of it works together seamlessly, right?
Correct.
Interesting. How do what are tips to budget for that sort of thing? Is that where the developer drives that process, the project manager drives? Is the founder expected? Like, how do I know that if I'm going to build incrementally different, functionalities of some software? What's the best way to look at that?
So really, it depends on the company you're working with.
Okay.
As an example, unless there's an extreme condition, it's priced into our model.
Okay.
You don't really have a choice.
And that makes sense, though. You want to make sure you're producing quality.
So, and if you don't like that, we don't work with you
Sure.
typically. Now there are a few edge cases. So it really depends on the project and the project manager and the company you're working with.
Okay.
It may be a thing where you're paying for maybe some higher priced developers out of America, but
Right.
maybe that company can outsource QA to a third party to keep those costs a little lower. But at the end of the day, as long as most testing is automated, your QA time shouldn't be terrible. But again, it's all dependent on the project.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What would be from a launch standpoint, on this? What are some of the considerations with regard to? I'm going to ask you a little bit of a legal question.
Okay.
But I know you got it there though. I'm doing this tech stack, right? I've got all these different integrations that are out there. How do we put all this together and brand it something else? Like what do I have to make sure that I'm thinking about when I want to use tech stack A and buy this subscription and buy that subscription? Like from the developer standpoint, how do you connect them all?
How do I connect them all?
Yeah, API. I mean,
Yeah.
What does that do? I mean, what are the things I should be considering about having all these different APIs that are out there with all these? I look at them like tubes connecting everything.
Mm-hmm.
What should I be worried about from a risk standpoint?
Well, from a risk standpoint, if you have a system that's dependent on X amount of third-party services, what happens if one of those third-party services goes down?
Okay.
Are you protected by them? What's their service level agreement to you? Like if you're paying $15 a month to them, do they really care?
Talked about service level agreement. What does
Okay.
that mean?
So SLA, service level agreement,
Yep.
is basically like, what does the provider owe you?
Okay.
What will they do to remediate downtime?
Okay.
What if you're using them, like let's just pretend you're doing a stock trading thing.
Okay.
And your data provider goes down, which is the source of all knowledge for your entire system.
Right.
What are they going to do to remediate the fact that all your users could do nothing
Right.
until they came back up? So I try to get people not to rely on too many third-party things, because at a certain point, you just have spaghetti.
Right.
You have so many connections coming in. This handles authentication. This is your database. This is some random service talking to Twitter or X.
Right.
But then it all ends up breaking, and you don't know where it broke sometimes. So I usually recommend that you don't have too many third-party services. If you can build it in-house and can afford to, then build it in-house. And I don't know if I even answered your question.
No, you did.
So
It's the spaghetti. I mean, it's the spaghetti part of that, right? Which, I mean, I've seen, for clients, intricate drawings that have like 9 different API connections to this, and it goes here and it goes there. And I'm always like, what happens if that one breaks?
Yeah.
And I think the answer was, I never asked it, was it all broke. And you're really leaving your whole project, your company in the hands of, 1/9, but any one of them can destroy it
Exactly.
or turn it off.
Yeah. You don't want to outsource your mission critical stuff.
That's right. There you go.
You don't want to give someone else the power who maybe they do the same mission critical thing for thousands of people, but you're not protected. So what do you do then?
How does Zelifcam go back with regard to like the code, which, code is like gold, especially when it's unique code, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you guys safeguard the code? How do you guys work with teams that safeguard the code, just from a risk standpoint, out of curiosity?
Yeah. So we store all code on in encrypted servers. Everything's encrypted at rest. All encryption keys are elsewhere, and they change out every week.
Wow.
So we're not too worried about it.
Right.
So even if somebody gets access to our physical servers, there's not much you can do.
Right.
And that's what we do with all our clients as well. If they have sensitive data in their databases, we assume that the database is going to get leaked. We hope it doesn't.
Right.
But we assume it does. But typically everything that's important is encrypted, and it's a useless database at that point.
Well, and people don't realize, again, speed, trying to get to functionality, there's a trade-off there in some circumstances. But they also don't realize, like offshore, going back to offshore, I know I'm the hypocrite. You don't really have that level of, confidence that your code is actually protected.
We do.
On the offshore.
Yeah, we do.
Okay, gotcha.
All of our offshore people, they use virtual desktops.
So they're using your servers.
We host on our own servers.
Aha.
Yeah.
Nice.
We don't. Now, yes, they can take pictures. Yes, they could. They're. I can't fix everything.
Right.
But we make it very hard.
But there's a whole lot of precautions.
Yep.
But if I'm using Upwork to offshore to somebody there, I have no knowledge
Good
of what
luck.
that is.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about the risk of embedding somebody else's code within a code, right? Because some people don't realize, when you look at some agreements that are out there, they take their cookie cutter code of whatever they have because they've done it before and they paste it in. Right? Which makes sense. I mean, as a lawyer, I tell everybody, about 60% of the document is a form.
Yeah.
But that other 40%, that's where the magic happens. That makes it unique for there, right? But, if I take in for a legal contract, a provision and go, ooh, yeah, I need that one over here and put it in, it's pretty clear. Okay, it's for this legal contract. But code, it's like gold. So what are some things that founders need to be thinking about just in questions they can ask regarding how that code creation could involve other people's codes, third-party codes? Like what do they need to really be aware about, that when they're dealing with a developer on that matter?
Yeah, they need to define who owns the code, right? And what provisions are in place. What if they used some third-party software that requires a license that the developers purchased and it's not transferable? Or maybe it's not supposed to be used in production code or in a system where it's thousands of people using it, but it's a single license.
Right.
I mean, what does that open the client up to? That's a big issue. And you see a lot of copy-pasted code all over the place.
Well, yeah. I mean, between open source and then, even those licenses, which defining those in agreement, right, is critical. Some of the things that, our clients have is, really a warranty that just says, look, the code you're giving me, I own it. And if it's any third party software, I know who the third party is, and we're good. But if it's anything you give me, developer, right, then you're giving me a license and you're saying it's nobody else's. Like that license is royalty free, what we call it, to try to minimize that.
Yeah.
And again, another importance of working with reputable companies because developers, because you can ask around at prior clients as to what's taken place. They have a track record you can see.
Yep.
Some offshores, there's some very large offshores out there that do this, and they have track records too. But it's an added advantage because sometimes you don't know until it's too late.
Yeah.
And when you pull that core piece out and the whole thing just crumbles around you because it was the integral piece, it can do a whole lot of damage.
And I have a great example of that.
I'd love to hear it.
So we have a client, we've had them for about 6 months now. Their only developer passed away. And he was also the owner of the company. Now the kids own it. Well, we don't even have the newest source code. Like we have source code from like 3 versions prior, and we've been reverse engineering it. None of the licenses are transferable.
Oh, wow.
So that's a big issue we've got. And none of the software is even sold anymore.
Oh,
so
no.
This code hasn't been worked on since 1999, 2000. We're developing on Windows XP right now.
Did they at least get the Y2K patch in that one?
I hope. So we're developing on Windows XP, and a lot of the work we're doing right now is simply removing third-party controls that are no longer licensable and replacing it with newer stuff or things that are built into VB6. And that's been our whole job for months now. And it's a lot of work. And all because there's no license.
Right.
And the developer, the owner of the company, he licensed everything under his name, not the company's name.
Oh, man.
And these third-party companies will not help.
Oh, wow.
And they won't even sell a new license to us. So we've given up.
Which, again, brings up another legal aspect to this, right? Is, most entrepreneurs, almost all the ones I know, they're building something so they can sell it for bukus of money and get out, right? But a lot of times what these deals are asset deals that come through with contracts that have to get assigned. And if licenses and stuff can't, you do change out the dynamics. Now we can do a stock deal and some other things to get around it. But making sure you can transfer your assets to another company for whatever reason, it is something to at least know about.
Yeah.
There's some things you can get around it sometimes, but it's something to at least know about on it. Well, Brandon, this has been eye-opening for me. I just vision, like when you're talking just a second ago, like we're having to take these pieces out that haven't been around since 1999. Think about the most complex car mechanic out there, and they still have nothing. I mean, like you guys deal in like just I don't know, virtual worlds and everything else and can get lost in those codes, which, I mean, I guess is a little matrix is what I'm thinking more of. What I'd love to leave with this is maybe just your top 3 tips for a entrepreneur that's going to begin developing their software. What are the 3 things they need to be thinking about today as they take that very first step in order to do that? What advice would you give them, or what tips would you give them?
So if you're getting ready to at least do an MVP, know what features you feel like your investors are going to be interested in. Spend time on the features, or at least the presentation that really touches on the major features that sell your product. That would be number one. We do have a lot of folks who come to us and it's just too early. They don't have enough information about their project and they want us to figure it out. We can't figure it out for them.
Right.
So that would be number one. Number two, we see this all the time. We inherit a lot of code all the time where they'll find a developer, oftentimes a very good developer, but that developer forces a specific tech stack on them.
Right.
And this happens all the time. And it's not because the developer had any bad intentions. It was just that's all they knew.
That's all they knew.
And they didn't really pick the right tool for the job.
Right.
So always talk to the developer. If they start telling you tech stacks before they even plan out your project or doing your research, find another developer.
Okay.
Absolutely find one. And 3, do your research. Look at the portfolio. If they don't have a portfolio, you should probably be a little concerned.
Okay.
If they do have a portfolio, make sure it's not fake. We see that a lot.
Wow.
And ask for proof. If they tell you they built something, ask them for proof and see what they can do.
Okay.
And if they say it's all hidden behind NDAs, that's not true.
There you go.
That's not true at all.
Especially if somebody is doing that software somewhere, right, and selling it, I'm sure there's a way that they can prove they did pieces of it.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I always look for a portfolio and get proof of that portfolio because you can look on Upwork. There's a lot of fake profiles.
Right.
We even use Upwork. We have an agency on Upwork, and our account has been cloned by scammers.
Goodness.
Yeah, and the only reason we know is we've had people call us and say, hey, I'm talking to you on here and blah, blah, blah. And like, no, you're not talking to us at all. So, yeah, check that portfolio and get proof. Because if they can't give you proof, then they're probably not the right choice.
So, I mean, as you can tell, and Brandon, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, it is critical that you get the right team for this. It's critical too on the legal documents, and we have education that we have on developer agreements and stuff to talk through that in our membership. But getting the right actual person to do it, because as lawyers, I can paper whatever needs to get paper, but at the end of the day, if the people like Zelifcam who can execute it are executing it, it's beautiful. Mm-hmm. But if you've got other companies that are out there, especially those that are scammers, right? The best piece of paper in the world, or promises, they're empty and you're chasing the money that you put into some, escrow agreement that's gone. So do your homework. I think that's the one. Ask a lot of questions. As you heard from Brandon, he's here as a mentor at Geekdom. We do mentorship as well. Ask questions. Join Geekdom. Make sure you can get those answers. Brandon, thanks so much again for coming today. This has been great.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did. Learning about developers and making sure that you understand all of the key aspects is critical, especially for these tech companies that are going to need a valuable partner in a developer for their product. Now, here at the South Texas Business Lawyers, we're on a mission to educate, support, and advise every small and medium-sized business owner, as well as every startup founder in the state of Texas. And the South Texas Power Lunch is just another way that we are trying to add value to you and help you along your journey. Now, if there's anything else we can do for you, we're right here on the advice site. But if not, we'll see you the next time on the South Texas Power Lunch.